The first place Baltimore Orioles are in New York taking on the Yankees before making their way home to take on the first place Cleveland Indians. Almost sounds like 95 or 97 at this point. Jay Jaffe covers all things baseball at SI.com. And more than that, covers all of sports, but really on the baseball side of the Hall of Fame and the history, has inked an interesting piece for you at SI.com, putting players aside from other players and errors aside. And now that we're getting toward the end of a couple of errors, including A-Rod and David Ortiz and even Albert Pujols, the discussion is wide open. Jay, I don't know what's a Hall of Famer or what's not. I just know my cousin's still in, and I've just been trying to kick him out since they put him in '84, man. What's going on? How's life, Jay Jaffe?
Life is good here. I am in the finishing stages of a manuscript for a book about the Hall of Fame called the Cooperstown Casebook, which should be out about a year from now. I'm unfortunately not going up to the inductions this weekend here, but I've got my eye on the Hall of Fame, and it's a good time to write about the players that we're seeing who are working their way there, both the guys putting the finishing touches on their careers like David Ortiz and Carlos Beltran, and the younger guys like Mike Trout and Clayton Kershaw, who are already staking out a claim to wind up in a similar situation maybe 20 years from now.
You know, Jay, I've been talking all week with Yankees people, right? And look, I saw Teixeira play over Mount St. Joe. It's 2 miles from where I'm sitting right now and where I live. And I watched his career. Was he on the path? Like, I went back and looked at the numbers and just kind of fell off the cliff. Meanwhile, A-Rod had his banishment and the steroids and all that stuff, but Ortiz is fascinating in that I don't know that we've seen this ever, right? Like this kind of year from him. And if it's an exclamation point on what was already a Hall of Fame career, fine. And then, of course, Ichiro. There's going to be a hell of a case. I'm going to be the first guy making the case for him, also kind of at the end of the rope as well. So, I mean, there's all different kinds of hitters, but Ortiz is going out with quite the bang, isn't he?
Yeah, he is, and he is in a position to to finish off the best final season of any hitter in Major League history. I mean, he leads the league in slugging percentage. As of a couple days ago, he also led in on-base percentage and was on pace to challenge the single-season doubles record of all things. Certainly a big part of the Red Sox latest run. This is a guy who's already got 3 championship rings and really is the common thread in the Red Sox turnaround here. He's got a few obstacles in terms of the Hall of Fame. Nobody who's played that much at designated hitter has ever been voted in before.
Yeah, just ask Edgar Martinez. I went through that a couple weeks ago.
This is a guy who's played a lot more at DH than Edgar Martinez. So, I think that'll be an issue that the voters are certainly going to have to contend with. Also, the fact that his name was on the supposedly anonymous 2003 survey test list as failing a PED test.
If his name was on it, it wasn't anonymous.
Yeah, it wasn't anonymous. Yeah, no. There are issues. There are issues he'll have to contend with.
I think there's issues right now from the eyeball test to look at a guy of this age with these problems doing this. Every time he hits a home run against the Orioles, Twitter is awash with make him pee in a cup, right?
Well, but I would say that's the same. The same is true for anybody who's up there in the stratosphere at home runs. And I know Orioles fans, obviously, they've had to hear it with regards to Chris Davis in recent years too. So, that's just an unfortunate reality of the game is that there's this always going to be a certain amount.
Just ask the Russian Olympic team, right? Right. Jay Jaffe joining us here. A little baseball conversation. Great piece at SI.com on who's sort of in the Hall of Very Good, as I like to say. You're a couple names here that you brought up. Pujols, we'll make an argument for him in a minute, but more in the middle, Beltran, and Chase Utley. All Hall of Very Good for me. You'd have to make a hell of a case for those 3. Now, Pujols is in a different place for me, and we talk about guys that have tailed off, especially after he got paid. Pujols has to be in the Hall of Fame of that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, what Pujols did in his first 11 seasons in St. Louis was, pretty much unprecedented for the start of any player's career. The numbers that I'm looking at here have him as well qualified for the Hall of Fame. I base this stuff on wins above replacement measured against for each player on a career and peak access, which I define as players' best 7 years, and I compare those to the players who are already in the Hall of Fame. Pujols actually rates in that system as the second best first baseman of all time, behind only Lou Gehrig. Now that's He's also got a couple championship rings there. He's got a well-rounded case. Might reach 3,000 hits. Might reach 600 homers. He's gonna go in. You look further down there. Carlos Beltran is a guy who's maybe got a shakier case, but the advanced stats certainly suggest that he's a worthy guy. Chase Utley's probably a tougher one to swallow for some people because so much of his value is from defense and base running and things like that aren't easily measured, and he got a late start to his career. But my system is basically designed to find that stuff, to look beyond just the simple Triple Crown stats of batting average, runs batted in, and home runs, to see what these guys did, how it affected, how it when adjusting for era. Because a lot of players in the Hall of Fame come from really high-scoring eras, and just trying to level the playing field, so to speak.
Look, I went on to 30 ballparks in 30 days last summer for the Bone Marrow Registry, and I made a specific stop in Cooperstown between an afternoon game at Fenway and a night game at Yankee Stadium. I drove, literally, it was the night that Steph Curry beat LeBron to win the NBA title. We were driving on a back road in Cooperstown listening to New York radio, and I woke up there, and we swabbed in the Hall of Fame, swabbed the mayor of Cooperstown, who had just written a book as well, and, and I know Jeff Idelson real well. I got to be honest, man. I mean, the Piazza this week, I'm shaky on that. Griffey, all due respect, I tip my cap, and I just think, and I'm one of those guys that could have been a Hall of Fame voter. At 21 years I covered baseball before Angelos threw me out of the Orioles clubhouse for reporting the truth. But I would just say this: if I had a card right now and I had to vote, it is perplexing where you put the steroid thing and how you vote or don't vote. You've put together a system, right? The Jaws. Tell me about the Jaws system, and tell me about your book. I want to hear what the Cooperstown Case Book's all about.
Okay. Well, like I said, the JAWS system, it uses wins above replacement, which is designed to measure a player's offensive and defensive contribution, designed to adjust for era, because we've just seen a very high scoring era, the so-called steroid era. And we want to level the playing field. Obviously, I think voters still are very conscious of milestones like 500 homers and 3,000 hits and 300 wins, but those are not the be-all and end-all of analyzing performance. And so what I've tried to do is to adjust for that by using these more advanced statistics and taking into account, say, the extra defensive value that a shortstop or a third baseman has relative to a big slugging first baseman. To get back to Adrian Beltre, for example, this is a guy who rates as the second best fielding third baseman of all time, behind only Brooks Robinson. A guy who's maybe hasn't gotten all the Gold Gloves that he might have earned if had he been on TV more during his prime, but also a guy who's going to get there on the traditional milestones because he's approaching 3,000 hits. So the idea is that I look at every player on the ballot every year as they come up and highlight the ones that I think that measure up via my system. And I'm lucky that there are a handful of high-profile voters who acknowledge using the system, and certainly a lot of readers out there who like to follow along at home and make their cases on social media and in their own articles. And my system is called JAWS. It's for Jaffe Wins Above Replacement Score, and it's the foundation of this book that I've been working on for about 2 years, called the Cooperstown Case Book, which is going to be on the same label that Jeff Katz, the mayor of Cooperstown, that 81 split.
Who's a good man, by the way.
Very good man.
He gave me half the tour. They handed me off through the museum. We started at 6:30 in the morning. I got a private tour, dude. It was like being in Disneyland after dark. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
I had the whole Hall of Fame to myself for 2.5 hours in the morning. It was pretty freaking cool, man.
I did that for 4 days in late January, early February. Hung out with Jeff Katz, hung out with Jeff Idelson a little bit, the president of the Hall of Fame.
We swabbed him in front of the Luis Aparicio plaque.
Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty
cool.
pretty strong. But yeah, I love the Hall of Fame. My cousin's in the Hall of Fame. I've made trips to all the Tony Gwynn, Cal Ripken thing. I love it. I love what it represents, but I hate what it's become. And I'm a guy who's in the media. Has been in the media 32 years. I think I'm certainly eligible to be a voter and could have have been a voter had I not gone to war with the Orioles owner at this point. Maybe later in my life they would ask me to be a voter. But all that being said, if I were a voter, I don't know anything about your system, but your system better call Rafael Palmeiro a Hall of Famer if you put it together. But then you look at it and you were around the guy and you know the guy was using, and then what do? And I think that when you have a real vote, the statistics sort of go out the window as they have for Barry Bonds, right?
Well, okay. As I have come to work, the policy that I've come to work with. Okay, for example, Rafael Palmeiro. Certainly, he's got the milestones. One of 5 guys now with 3,000 hits and 500 home runs. He does measure up as a as good as the average Hall of Fame first baseman, if not a little bit better by some measures. That said, I think you can make a very strong case for the idea that if you're going to penalize candidates for using PEDs, a good place to start drawing the line is when baseball instituted its testing regimen, mandatory testing around the game, and Palmeiro was the first high-profile player to get popped. I think it's very reasonable for the voters to hold that against him. I think it's less reasonable to go on hearsay and innuendo when it comes to the guys who came before that, or the point when Major League Baseball did not have a coherent policy, when there was no enforcement of the rules that were on the books. Basically, when there just was no mechanism for penalty. I mean, I think what Mark McGwire did versus what Rafael Palmeiro did, there's a difference there. I think even Barry Bonds, I think Mike Piazza, who acknowledged taking andro back in the '90s when it was still legal, as what McGwire was doing, or at least one of the things that McGwire was doing.
But in many cases, it's the eyeball test. I mean, I saw Sammy Sosa's forehead, for crying out loud, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I still think that the best way to do it is to look at the point when baseball did not have a policy and when baseball did have a policy, and to go by that. Now, I think obviously there are a lot of voters who feel differently, who are willing to vote on any level of suspicion they have, whether or not there's evidence. I just think that when you're talking about PED use, I mean it's like speeding tickets. If there's no cop, everybody's going to go 75 miles an hour on the freeway. You put a cop there, people are going to slow down. They're going to follow. They're going to follow the speed limits a little more closely. And if somebody gets popped, well, that's what happens. So I think that's the most coherent way to go about approaching this, rather than relying on hearsay and rumor and suspicion.
Well, and guys like Piazza, if you think he used steroids, you didn't vote for him. If you didn't, I guess you did. I mean, I never looked at him and thought slam dunk Hall of Famer in any way. I looked at Fred McGriff his whole career and thought, there was a guy that never had the sniff around him of the clear or the cream or whatever. And I don't think he's going to get in. And, it took Blyleven forever to get in, right? It took Sutton forever to get in. It really is a fascinating case study, and so much of it had to do with color of guys' skin, whether they were popular amongst the media. Look at Jim Rice and what he went through, and to me, he was a Hall of Famer. You know why? Because I saw him play. It's such a subjective thing and an art form as much as anything. And then there's the whole scrutiny of who votes and who doesn't vote. I just think it's a shame. I think it's a shame, something that I grew up, something so near and dear to me, and has my last name. Anybody I say, I'm Aparicio, they say, oh, your cousin's in the Hall of Fame. Yeah. And then I think, well, what's the value of that anymore, when it's become kind of tarnished for me? And I think it sucks, and I don't know any other way around it, but I don't know what to say about Bonds and Palmeiro and A-Rod and the other guys that cheated. I don't know if you have a special wing for them or not, but I know they played, and they played well, and they played at a high level, and they were allowed to play, but do you want to really put them on a dais next to Brooks Robinson?
Honestly, to me, I mean, I still go by the fact that there was no mechanism to punish those guys. At baseball, the owners spent 20 years trying to break the union, trying to institute salary cap, trying to roll back free agency. We got the collusion scandal out of this when we should have been getting a coherent drug policy. To me, I'm going to side with the players on that one. Guys saw the opening. They took what they did. Baseball was too busy trying to keep their salaries down to punish them. And this was a complete institutional failure. It's not just on Barry Bonds.
Agreed.
It's not on Sammy Sosa. I think you just have to let that go, because if you don't, I think then the Hall of Fame becomes a relic. And to me, having just spent 4 days up in that museum by myself in late January, it's not just about the plaques. That's what we argue over, 365 days a year.
But it is an honor, Jay. I mean, it's an honor. There was nothing honorable about what Barry Bonds did for me. And I understand, and believe me, I was in those clubhouses. I was in the Orioles clubhouse, dude. I mean, that might have been the most polluted place there was. I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to find a clubhouse that had more steroid pollution, over that era than the Orioles. Maybe the Rangers at one point, anything connected to Canseco, I guess. But, I really do think it's an honor, and I think that's why guys cry about it and get emotional about it and all that. And I think there's cheating, but I also understand the pressure on a Brady Anderson who was almost on his way to Japan, who, of course, never used steroids. Just ask him. He'll tell you he never used. But, there was pressure on all those guys to have jobs. So I would agree from an employment standpoint, if everybody around you is taking your job, it's just a messy subject, and it's not anything you and I are going to agree on over the next 10 or 15 minutes for sure, but I really do think that there's a universal agreement that it doesn't mean what it used to mean, and part of the voters keeping the cheaters out was to make it even more elite, but in some weird way, it makes it even more tarnished now, doesn't it, that you go to the Hall of Fame and Barry Bonds isn't in, right?
Yeah, I think that's a big problem, and I think that this hardline stance that has a basis in penalizing players for a retroactive morality, I think is a danger to the Hall of Fame. And to get back to what I was saying, we argue about who should be in there and who's on the plaques, but the museum itself is a wonderful place. It acknowledges the bumps in the road that baseball has hit. The Black Sox scandal's there. The color line is there. I mean, some dark chapters in baseball history, absolutely. There are exhibits about the steroid era. There's some frank discussion about what went on. Baseball is big enough to withstand this stuff. I mean, obviously, we see the game today. It's a thriving $9.5 billion industry on an annual basis. The Hall of Fame can withstand acknowledging that. It can withstand recognizing these guys who took advantage of a gray area. I think baseball and the Hall of Fame would be better for acknowledging that, for acknowledging the lessons that needed to be learned from that era, and moving on. Because otherwise, I think you continue to focus on this one dark chapter in baseball history, and that's all people are still talking about. I mean, we're going to be talking about Alex Rodriguez for the next 20 years because of what he did. You put Barry Bonds in the Hall of Fame, we stop talking about that chapter a little bit.
Well, I think Pete Rose belongs in the Hall of Fame. I mean, that has been my opinion for 20 years. Now, I think he's a pretty dastardly individual, and, all the lying, the year. I get all of that, and I get that he took the deal, but
there's a big difference between what Pete Rose did and what Barry Bonds did. What Pete Rose did, that rule has been posted in every clubhouse for nearly a century now. Gambling on baseball has been explicitly prohibited. What Barry Bonds was doing, there was no explicit prohibition of that in every clubhouse. There's a very big difference. Pete Rose knew exactly what he could not have possibly not known what he was doing when he was gambling about baseball.
Well, he also got 4,192 hits. Just ask him on his own. So, hey, Ichiro, slam dunk in your mind?
I think so. I mean, he's going to get to 3,000 hits, and absent any reason to any kind of allegations like that, like we've just discussed here. Yeah, absolutely, he's going to get in. I think he would have even if he hadn't gotten to 3,000 hits. And we're talking about a guy who, came over from Japan at age 27, reeled off an unprecedented streak of 10 straight seasons with 200 hits and 10 straight gold
Dude, we've
gloves.
never seen anything like that.
Yeah,
I wasn't around for
and
Clemente and for Jackie Robinson and all that. I've never seen anything like Ichiro. Never.
Yeah, no, he was a special player and certainly a fan favorite and somebody who I think showed a very different kind of a throwback style of playing baseball that I think has been a lot of fun to watch. I'm gratified that as he's approaching 3,000 hits here, he's actually having a very good season in a part-time role. I think absolutely he's going to be a first ballot guy, no question.
Jay Jaffe and I are yelling and screaming about the Hall of Fame. Jay, it reminds me of like the 1990s back when I was on the radio 20 years ago, where we did this 5 times a year. I don't do this often enough because I am very passionate about the Hall of Fame and Cooperstown. You can follow Jay out on Twitter at J_Jaffe. That's Jaffe. A wonderful picture of he and Keith Olbermann, who I admire greatly as well. And you can also follow his work out at SI.com, including his piece on some of the borderline Hall of Very good current players. Jay, last thing for you on the young players and what was at the All-Star game last week and where we are in Baltimore with Machado and Houston with Correa and Altuve and Chicago with Bryant. And, we go on through D.C. and out to Anaheim and Trout and all that stuff. Interestingly enough to me, I had a young kid working for me a couple years ago. And he knew baseball. He was a little whippersnapper, thought he knew more than he did and all that good stuff. But he looked at me, and this is literally in Mike Trout's second year or third year, and says, well, Mike Trout's going to the Hall of Fame. And I'm like, oh, young child. I look at it right now and say Machado, Trout, Harper, right? They're all going to the Hall of Fame, just like Fred Lim was going to the Hall of Fame, right? Just like Torey Lovello and, on and on and on. Bobby Valentine was going to the Hall of Fame at one point. It really is fascinating, the early part of these guys' careers, and as much as you've put together this nice piece of some guys that are on the hill or way over the hill or going off the hill, there's a whole bunch of under 30 guys here that are in that conversation to, over the next 10 years, really be special baseball players.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Mike Trout and Fred Lynn's a very interesting comp. I think, in terms of the wins above replacement, the best rookie seasons of the last half century are Fred Lynn 1975, Ichiro 2001, and Mike Trout. All of them roughly about 10 wins above replacement. You can, depending upon which system you look at here. Fred Lynn, had a nice career, but had a lot of injuries there. Never approached that 1975 season again. Mike Trout has had roughly three seasons that are in the same ballpark as that rookie season. Obviously he's got to show the longevity, but he is already building a strong case. This is a guy who could easily have 4 MVP awards instead of 1 right now, depending upon the vicissitudes of the voting process, which I'm sure as a former member of the BBWA, you can certainly speak to that. I think it's what Harper and Trout and Machado are doing. These are guys 21 to 24 years old. 21 to 24 years old. It is almost ridiculous that we're able to even talk about these guys in a Hall of Fame context. Yet you look at what Trout has done relative to what Ty Cobb and Willie Mays did and Mickey Mantle. I mean, in terms of the value metrics, once you adjust for era, he is on par with those guys on an age-to-level basis. And that's the thrilling thing. And to be able to just highlight that and so that people can appreciate that as it happens, we don't know if he's going to get there. Right now, it certainly looks that way. Let's just appreciate it as it goes on here. Pay special attention to it. And the same goes for Harper and Machado. They may not get there, but let's enjoy while they're in their primes here because we have more means of watching these guys than ever before. Let's do it.
Hey, I'm having a good time. The first place Baltimore Orioles are in New York in July. Jay, I don't get to say that much, but it's been a nice little run for them. I know you're watching baseball as well. Any thoughts on the AL East race or the great Yankees sell-off of 2016?
Yeah, I think absolutely the Yankees need to be sellers. You look at that pitching staff, and as great as the bullpen is, they've got about 1.5 functioning, competent starters per time through the rotation. You're just not going to string together the 5-game winning streak you need to even pretend that you're relevant. The Orioles, man, that offense is just gangbusters. I mean, there's so much power there. The addition of Mark Trumbo has turned out to be a great thing for them. I don't think that you can survive with a rotation putting up an ERA above 5, though, and make the playoffs. So I think they really need to go out and get not 1, but maybe 2 starters if they're going to shore that up and survive the stretch run. I think the Red
I love
Sox,
how you say that, 2 starters. That you're very optimistic. I mean, I'm praying for 1, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a tight market. You look at what the Red Sox have done. They went out. They've already gotten some help for their bullpen and their rotation. They desperately need it, but their offense is going like gangbusters too. I think they're in pretty good shape. I think the Blue Jays certainly have the strength to be there. I'm a little bit more down on their system because I know that they traded off their best prospects last year in getting David Price and Troy Tulowitzki, but I think it's going to be a 3-team race for 2 spots in the playoffs there between those guys.
Hey, man, it's going to be a great summer here in Baltimore. If you love baseball, football starts next week. Jay is on it all at SI.com. He is Jay Jaffe. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at J_Jaffe as well. Hey, dark beer connoisseur, does that mean stouts? Are you a stout man?
Yep,
Jay?
I love my stouts, absolutely.
Yeah, that's, I've gotten hooked. I used to just be like, that American light beer drinker. But my tastes have matured here, I think.
Right. Good.
Jay,
yeah, there's a lot of good stuff out there.
Well, and they sell it at ballparks, too. That's the best
Sure.
part. Jay, great having you on, man. Appreciate
All
you.
right, thanks a lot, man.
There he goes, Jay Jaffe, author of the upcoming book, The Cooperstown Case Book, and the creator of the JAWS system for Hall of Famers during Hall of Fame week. Enjoy your Piazza and enjoy your Griffey. I enjoyed Griffey's old man back in the 70s. I was a huge Ken Griffey Sr. fan before he was Ken Griffey Sr. He was just Ken Griffey in 1978 with Davey Concepcion. And, I was never a fan of, the Big Red Machine. Obviously, in 70, 71, I wasn't sort of around. But those late 70s Reds teams with Perez and Griffey and Cesar Geronimo. And, oh, man, those were good days. Gullet on the hill, right? Absolutely. I didn't hate on them. You know why? They were playing the Yankees all the time or the Red Sox. And I hated the Red Sox and I hated the Yankees. So when they were playing them, I rooted for Johnny Bench. So sue me. I still like Joe Morgan, by the way. You can find me out in the Bayou Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app, becoming crystal clear from anywhere you are. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Taos in Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.